Downtown is the beating heart of a community, and I think it's a reflection of your vibrancy as a community. And I think it gives people healthy choices, things to do and places to meet.
There's so many major events that happen downtown. I think of like Art Fest and World Refugee Day and some of those things where the community really comes together, and that's played a huge role in some of the work that I do as a music therapist, because I'm in the schools, I'm working with students who want to connect with their community and feel like they're a part of the community, and almost every event that we've been part of that does that happens downtown.
You know, downtowns can be either an asset or a liability in attracting talent and visitors to a region. I certainly think that Grand Forks downtown is an asset, something that can be built upon. Downtown is a magnet for creative talent and in the knowledge-based economy as well.
Being downtown helps us achieve the office culture that we're going for. One of the biggest things about this business is keeping talent and attracting talent, and we feel that if we're downtown in a place where young, motivated people want to be, that's good for us.
And I see a lot of my peers especially coming downtown for a show at the Empire, going across the street for a drink, going down the block for dinner, shopping around the corner. They're really looking for a place that has it all, that is aesthetically pleasing, that is culturally diverse, and offers everything that they could want within a small area. And I think that downtown Grand Forks has all of those things.
One of the things that's great about it is that it's intergenerational. It's a place where young folks and older folks can all get together on equal terms. And the other nice thing about the downtown area is that it provides a sense of history. It provides, particularly my children, a sense that they're connected to something bigger than themselves.
UND has worked to have a presence downtown. There's the Empire Arts Center, home to the UND art collections, and a number of other UND events, such as the commissioning of ROTC officers.
And by sending our students beyond the boundaries of our campus, we can get out into the community and add value to the city of Grand Forks. It's a great partnership, it's a great exchange. We enjoy very much the partnership at the University of North Dakota with the city of Grand Forks.
I live close enough where I can ride my bike to work, I can walk to work, or I can actually ride my bike to work as quickly as I can drive to work. So, and I know you can't do that in very many communities. If you forget your keys, you can go back home and be back in time.
We can get here very easily by our bicycles. We love to ride our bikes for transportation. And to come downtown, we don't have to drive our car. We can ride our bikes here and then walk to wherever we need to go. Everything from getting our groceries to dining in restaurants, doing our banking, and our kids taking guitar lessons can all happen downtown.
And that's one thing about downtown too, is that there's no prejudice or pretenses with anyone. Everyone's the same down here. It doesn't matter who you are, and that's kind of neat.
Key factor in attracting the talent and the...
Of course.
They did that on purpose.
Yes, they did.
Okay. It's also very friendly to foot traffic. Are you gonna have a blooper reel? I could help.
What do you like about it, Simon?
Yeah. Oh man, I love coming.
My name is Justin Auk. Let me try that again. I looked at the camera again. It's hard not to, isn't it?
Welcome to the second annual Downtown Day sponsored by Alaris. How about that video and HB Sound for everything that they've done? I'm Stacy Myshak. I'm the Executive Director of the Downtown Development Association. There are a lot of people who helped lead this organization from behind the scenes, and if I could, ask the DDA Board of Directors to please stand and be recognized. This is a board that is extremely passionate about downtown, and I feel very lucky that they've allowed me to help carry out their vision. We've come a long way in a year, and it all starts with the over 70 contributing partners that came on with us during our first year. Without the help of our partners, we would not have been able to make the strides that we have. And so I want to thank you today. As promised, we've taken downtown under our wing and have worked with countless volunteers that have logged over 2,000 hours. In addition, we've received very generous in-kind donations to the tune of over $20,000. There is a true love for our downtown, and it's not just by the residents and the businesses, but by people all over this community. One activity we instituted this past summer was Downtown Cleanup Day. This is where we asked volunteers to join us in Town Square, and we went out and we helped clean up our downtown space. This is something that's really important to us. Creating a vibrant downtown isn't just about programming. Cleanliness and beautification play a huge role, and we're committed to this effort. And in terms of beautification, we're very excited today to announce for the first time that American flags are going to be flown on street posts down Demers in downtown on holidays such as 4th of July, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day. We worked closely with the Planning and Community Development Department to make this happen. It's going to be a beautiful addition, and we're very excited about it. And I know we don't want to mention the W word now that we're trying to get into spring, but this past winter we completed a project that is very close to my heart, and I hope it found a place in your heart as well. The DDA decorated and brought to you the ice skating rink in Town Square. We would not have been able to do this. This labor of love was helped by so many people, and we really wouldn't have been able to do it without our partners. And I'm also really proud to say that Grand Forks was the first of the North Dakota cities to put an ice skating rink in their downtown. We've been contacted by several other cities to find out how it can work in theirs. Our mission is to continue to be a leader in growing our downtown. And again, we wouldn't be able to do this without your support. So we've been busy. And in addition to all of this, we like to play a little too. And so some of the things you can look to see from us this summer are Art and Wine Walk. We're going to work with North Valley Arts Council to bring this fun, casual event to downtown. Blues on the Red, this fantastic concert series. We're going to have a lot of brand new bands that are coming from as far away as Texas. And you know how we like to encourage walking and biking, right? So watch for these signs popping up around the downtown area. We're going to put a brand new spin on how you can get places without your vehicle. Yes, it's possible, and it's easier than you think. So with that, I'm going to want to introduce our very first speaker. Jeannie Mock has an environmental studies degree from the Concordia College in Moorhead and a master's of science from UND. She currently works at AE2S as a permitting specialist. In her role on the City Council, she serves on several committees and boards, and most currently serves as a representative on the city's Arts and Events Vibrancy Committee. Please help me welcome Jeannie Mock.
Thank you, Stacy. A sense of place is vital towards cultivating a strong community. Downtowns are uniquely capable of providing this sense of place to their cities. But what is a sense of place? How can we enhance this in Grand Forks, and what role can the downtown play in this endeavor? The art of geography describes a sense of place as a combination of characteristics that make a place special and unique, a phenomenon that involves the human experience in a landscape as well as the local knowledge and folklore. When we look to our downtown, we see a place that provides a character, look, and heritage not found in other areas of the city. Our downtown has evolved over time as we see modern-day boutiques in old buildings, banks, city government, historical buildings that house new restaurants that are some of the most unique to our city. The setting of downtown mixes the heritage of the past with the modern flow of our everyday lives so seamlessly that we often forget the legacy we are helping to make for the future. When we think of our sense of heritage in Grand Forks, the river plays a vital role. Our downtown is located along the waterfront. Just as the city was first founded along the water, we remain here today with our homes and businesses, now with a rich greenway providing open space in the city. Green space in cities has become part of the urban planning metric, and for good reason. The Greenway itself is an invaluable asset, not only in its functional flood and stormwater control, which keeps homes in the near North Side neighborhood protected, but also in the activities it provides and the culture it cultivates. The Greenway allows citizens open area for recreation, nature, and a 20-mile multi-use path that allows for a defined sense of place along the river. Again, this gives our downtown the power of providing community to all citizens and the connectivity to other areas of the city so that everyone can come downtown. This human activity is vital to providing a sense of place and bringing people who linger and shop, sip coffee, or attend events in the town square. Not only does our downtown still exist against the odds, but it has developed and prospered, largely due to people on the DDA and past city leaders who have recognized this cornerstone to our city and have invested in public-private partnerships, a phenomenon that allows for investment in our future as a city. The city itself has a house of government on the edge of downtown, drawing leaders and staff to its heart daily. The city also invests in arts and events that take place all over the city, but especially have a presence in our downtown. From Art Fest and fireworks on the 4th of July, activities draw people to walk and socialize, to the farmers market in the fall and ice skating in the winter. Our town square provides more than the location for people to gather. It allows for citizens to become community members. The role of the city in the downtown is ultimately to foster and support this vital element of our city. The role of the city is to facilitate infill through comprehensive zoning that helps citizens get the best value for their tax dollars and promotes existing neighborhoods through revitalization. Ultimately, it is the role of the city to help draw community members to the downtown so they feel engaged and welcomed, like they have a sense of place in our downtown and are a stakeholder to its success in the future. It is through this engagement that community members begin to feel as if the success of the downtown is their success and ultimately a sign of a successful city. Thank you.
I'll introduce our next speaker. Brett Weber is an associate professor in UND's Department of Social Work. His academic research focuses on social welfare history with a focus on war on poverty and related community organization programs, and an emphasis on housing and environmental issues. In addition to being a member of the City Council, he serves on various boards, including the Local Housing Authority, Red River Valley Community Action, and is a founding member of the Grand Forks Community Land Trust. Please help me welcome Brett Weber.
Thank you, Stacy. Thanks. I like what Jeannie had to say about the importance of place, the importance of history, and the contributions of the Downtown Development Association. It's been great getting to sit between Jeannie and Crystal this last year. As they become veterans and they're taking on more and more leadership roles, they no longer get to call themselves newbies, so they're doing a great job there. I have the honor of representing Ward 3 from Riverside through the near North Side neighborhood, through the downtown onto the near South Side. These neighborhoods run along the Red River and constitute the heart and soul of the city of Grand Forks. Cities and their downtowns are not simply made or lost according to invisible forces. While it's become excessively popular to talk about letting the market decide some of the most important things about our lives, the reality is that the ebb and flow of a community, the rise and fall of its fortunes, and the strength or weakness of its inclusiveness and happiness are to a very large degree the result of the energies expended and the decisions made by the people who live there. Whether a city is a dispiriting place to reside, to simply reside, or a joyful place to live and grow is primarily a consequence of intentional, long-term planning, broad collaborations, and the financial and personal investments from its citizens. I want to tell you something about the exciting and promising developments in Grand Forks, but first, I think it's important to provide some context. And that context, that historic context, is a useful, though not always a very happy story. The United States, frankly, has made some terrible mistakes in relation to its cities. Since the 1920s, the majority of Americans have lived in cities rather than on farms. Americans are an urban people. And even in rural states like North Dakota, the vast majority of people have depended on and continue to depend upon economic and cultural centers like Grand Forks for many of the necessities of life. However, from the 1950s through the 1980s, as we became increasingly urban, many city dwellers became suburban, taking their shopping and tax dollars away from urban cores, away from the downtowns. And one result was that for a period of a few decades, many cities turned their backs on the downtowns, on their downtowns, tearing down some problematic buildings, but also historic treasures. That process, known in its day as urban renewal, was the wrong-minded wisdom of that time period. Cities didn't make those mistakes because they thought they were doing the wrong thing. Instead, they simply didn't understand the damage they were causing. But that's a story from the past, mistakes from the past. Most recently, the nation's most successful cities, and by this I mean cities much larger than our own, but also cities smaller than Grand Forks, have learned the value of embracing and revitalizing their downtowns. While big box commercial corridors like our 32nd Avenue provide a valued, beneficial economic service, it's in the downtowns that cities rediscover their historic and future heart and soul. We need to thank people like Elliot Glassheim, John O'Leary, Ken Vian, the team of Hal Gershman and Doug Christensen, and of course, Mayor Brown, for their intentional efforts to save Grand Forks downtown in the aftermath of the '97 flood. Currently, under Mayor Brown's leadership, there are 3 groups of public and private leaders who will be meeting over the next several months, developing a shared vision and recommendations for taking Grand Forks from its period of having survived the flood into a new period of expanded community and vibrancy. We're moving from surviving to thriving. Those 3 groups include one that's looking at ways to make Grand Forks not just the home of the state's university, but more of a true university town, a place where students want to move not just for an exceptional education, but because the city itself is a stimulating place to live and learn. There's also a group working on developing and more fully integrating arts and culture into the life of our whole city. I have the pleasure and honor of getting to serve on the 3rd of those 3 groups, the Downtown Working Group, which includes architects, business people, educators, and city staff and elected officials. These 3 groups are all staffed by visionaries actively working to make Grand Forks an even grander place to live. And because of their work, Grand Forks and its downtown are poised to embrace some very exciting and wonderful opportunities over the short and long term, meaning over the next few years and over the next few decades. The 3 groups have developed in tandem with, and to a large degree as a result of, the energy and leadership of the Downtown Development Association. And that organization owes much to the energy and leadership of a key individual. And so it's my pleasure to introduce to you now Jonathan Holt. Thank you.
You can see I'm not Jonathan, but I want an opportunity to, of course, read a little bit about him. He's obviously our president of our board, so I want to tell you a little bit about him. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Jeannie. Can we give a hand for our city council members that are here today? Thank you. Jonathan Holt is a lifelong Grand Forks resident who firmly believes that this city is the greatest city in the country. He is co-owner of the Toasted Frog restaurants in downtown Grand Forks, Bismarck, and Fargo. He has served as the president of the Downtown Development Association since its inception and is also the past vice president of the board of the Downtown Business Association in Bismarck. Locally, he serves on the steering committee for the CVIC's Building Hope campaign, is on the organizing committee for 1 Million Cups, and is co-chair of the Downtown Visioning Team for the city's Vibrancy Initiative. He is a fierce downtown advocate and self-proclaimed weirdo. Please help me welcome Jonathan Holth.
Thank you. Stay put, Stacy. Stay put, right here. I didn't tell you I was going to do this, otherwise you wouldn't have let me do it. I just want to recognize before Stacy leaves, 1 year ago, we stood on this stage and we were in the process of hiring our executive director. And we got over 60 applicants from around the country at that time. And we found Stacy in our backyard, and she has done an incredible job of leading our organization. So I want to recognize her. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for being here, everybody. So I want to talk to you about a few things today. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can because we want to get our keynote out on the stage. But I want to talk to you about a mindset. I want to talk to you about the mindset of this community, but specifically the mindset in downtown Grand Forks. There's a few things that we hear, that we have heard throughout the process of setting up and running the DDA. A few things that we hear from the community that we disagree with. It's rural here. We hear that a lot. Surprisingly enough, that's not a picture of downtown Grand Forks. That's a picture of a rural community. It is what it is. We hear that a lot. Downtown is what it is. We did a great job rebuilding after the flood, and it's great, but it is what it is. We can leave it alone. It's not family friendly. There's nothing to do if you have kids in downtown Grand Forks, right? It's just for adults. We need to stop thinking that way today. The minute we believe those things is the minute that we fail. We're not a rural community. We're a thriving urban center. We're constantly evolving and growing. There's some mixed-use housing projects that you see there that have happened in downtown Grand Forks in the past few years. One of them is the Brew Pub in the old Opera House. I think Matt Windjam's here. He'll tell you an opening date later, right, Matt? No? Not ready to announce yet? But we're always evolving and growing. We are family friendly. You saw in the video about families that like to bring their kids downtown. We have a beautiful greenway for that. We have plenty of events downtown. We have great restaurants for families. So we need to start thinking that way and believing that and building upon that. So what's next? 1 year ago we stood on this stage and we showed a headline from the Grand Forks Herald, and the headline read, "GF can learn from other cities." And we said that we want to flip that headline. And we want that to read that other cities can learn from GF. Stacy talked a little bit about the ice rink and that we were a leader on that front. That's one example. The picture on the slide, there it is, that's some leaders from Fargo that came down to spend some time in our downtown. A group of about 30 Fargo business leaders, public officials, and they wanted to learn what we did to incorporate our downtown into the flood protection plan. We were a leader on that front. So we need to keep leading. We need to keep taking risks and being first. A few things we need to focus on. Entrepreneurship. Downtown Grand Forks needs to be the entrepreneurial hub of this community. It also needs to be the arts hub of this community. The two are intertwined. It's not a coincidence that the most entrepreneurial communities in the country are also the communities that are the biggest supporter of the arts. And those two things intersect in downtown. We need to keep supporting entrepreneurs and keep helping them start businesses in downtown Grand Forks. One example of that, we have every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., 1 million cups here in the Empire Theater. We have anywhere from 70 to 130 people that get together to celebrate entrepreneurship in our community. We learn from each other. We talk about ways to start new businesses. It's not just about startups, it's about the businesses that have been here for 20 and 30 years. We need to continue to build on that. My friend Brandon has been trying to get a co-working space going in downtown Grand Forks for quite some time. His website is up there at evolvend.com. These are exactly the type of projects that we need to do. We need to support as a community. We need to say, what do we need to do to help you get up and going? Because it's places and spaces like this that make downtowns fantastic. We need to utilize underutilized spaces. And we need to do it with not me sitting on a chair reading a book at the top of a parking ramp. That's one way to do it, but there's more effective ways to do it. But we hear a lot from people that if we're going to grow Grand Forks, we have to expand the borders of downtown because there's no room for infill in downtown Grand Forks, right? It's full, it's dense. But it takes just a short walk through downtown to realize that that's not true, that we have opportunities for infill. This is a field. There's me again reading a book in a chair. This is just on the other side of the railroad tracks from the Empire, right across from the police station. This is a big grassy field right in the heart of our downtown. So there is opportunity for infill, and we need to make sure that we're utilizing those spaces. So I said I was a self-proclaimed weirdo. Here's visual evidence of that. This is the parking lot down by the Greenway, right? It's a huge parking lot, 120 spaces, I think, or so down there. A couple times a year for events, we see half of it full, but it can be utilized better. Better than me looking sad wearing a sarcastic t-shirt down by the Greenway. Stay tuned for the DDA to do something a little bit fun and exciting in that parking lot this summer. I want to talk briefly about the public library. This is a complicated conversation. You may have seen a letter from our board of directors in the paper this morning and an article that went along with it. I want to simplify this conversation about the library a little bit because I think it gets too complicated sometimes. So I want us to take our downtown and pretend like we're picking it up and we're putting it in another community of similar size. And I'm having a conversation with Joe Q Public about what they have in front of them. So I'm explaining downtown. So I say, hey, did you know you have a beautiful high school in the heart of your downtown with 1,000 students that breathe life into your downtown every day? Wow, that's fantastic. That's incredible. What an opportunity. Agreed, but wait, it gets better. You have the opportunity to build your city's greatest public amenity, another public learning institution, the public library, directly adjacent to that high school, where they can partner with the school and they can learn together. Wow, that is amazing, an amazing opportunity. That's incredible. Wait, there's more. There's an underutilized parking ramp smashed right in between the two of them. That's already there. It's already built. What? That's amazing. That's amazing. It's already there. What do we need to do to make that happen? What do we need to do to make that happen? We need to stop focusing on why that won't work and start focusing on why it needs to happen. Grand Forks needs a new library, it deserves a new library, and it should be downtown. The last thing I want to talk to you about today is the 1987 Minnesota Twins. Stay with me. And this pains me a little bit because I'm a lifelong Dodger fan. But as many of you might know, the 87 Twins won the World Series. They were a team that didn't have many expectations going into the season, didn't have a roster full of superstars. They had a young manager named Tom Kelly who thought differently about how the game should be played. He later became the youngest manager to win the World Series since 1905. They ended up, nobody on their roster finished in the top 5 of any of the 10 major statistical categories for Major League Baseball that year. They finished just above 500. Their opponents outscored them by 20 runs throughout the regular season. So how did they win the World Series? Well, they won it by hitting a bunch of singles. They won it by putting people on base and capitalizing on those opportunities. They hit the occasional timely home run, but it was mostly just putting people on base. We need to do the same thing in downtown Grand Forks. It's tempting for us to always want to swing for the fences and hit home runs. And we will continue to do that, like with the library. But we need to celebrate our singles and focus on them and continue to build on them. Downtown Cleanup Day. Stacy mentioned it earlier. This is a group of people that came down to pick up trash in our downtown. The group on the slide, they don't have a business downtown, they don't live downtown, they just recognize the importance of having an aesthetically pleasing downtown to a community. That's a single. This is a group of people that got together every Monday during the summertime to have lunch in Town Square and talk about our community and talk about ways we could improve it. Some great ideas came out of this group, but more importantly, passion for our community came out of this group. That's a single. Stacy mentioned that we had 2,000 volunteer hours in our downtown over the past year. 2,000, that's a big number. That's people that didn't get paid, that recognized that downtown was important, that came down here and they spent their time and resources. That's a single. 1 Million Cups, I mentioned it earlier. It started back in September with 30 people in 3rd Street Gallery talking about entrepreneurship. And it grew, so we needed to move to a different space. So we moved to the basement of the Empire, where 50 people started to show up. And it grew, so we needed to move it up to the main theater. We were building and building on singles, and we need to celebrate that. Any baseball nerds besides me know who that guy is? Greg Gagne, thank you. There's one other person. So Greg Gagne was the shortstop for the Twins in '87. He led a pretty nondescript career. Averaged around 250, never elected to an all-star team, never led in any of the major statistical categories, never even finished in the top 10. Smartened up and finished his career with the Dodgers, but for the most part, just was a good team player. Greg Gagne was the guy that drove in the winning run in Game 7 of the '87 World Series. He had a timely hit, and he was a team player. So why is this relevant to what we're talking about? Because anyone in this audience can be downtown's Greg Gagne. We want you to sit at the table with us, to bring your ideas, and to collaborate with all of you. 1 year ago, I stood on this stage and I asked Grand Forks to step up to the plate when it came to downtown Grand Forks. And you did. You stepped up to the plate. Now I'm asking you to take some swings. Thank you. So before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that I just spoke for about 10 minutes and only talked about parking like twice. So for all my friends, I'm capable of doing it. Thank you. Our keynote speaker today, we're very excited. Chuck Marohn is the president and co-founder of the nonprofit Strong Towns. His background as an engineer and planner working as a consultant for dozens of cities and towns across Minnesota gives him an intimate understanding of how land use and infrastructure projects get designed, funded, and built. This unique insight across traditional silos is what led him to start Strong Towns in the wake of the national financial crisis that left so many local governments reeling from the sudden halt in land development. A nationally sought-after speaker, Chuck has given over 200 presentations to public officials, staff professionals, and local citizens in the last 5 years to help them find a new pathway forward. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm Grand Forks welcome to Chuck Marohn.
Hey man, that was awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I love Greg Gagne. Yeah. Hey everybody. Thank you. Thank you for that welcome. Thank you for being here. This is my third time in this area, and I'm very happy to be back. A little bit quickly about our organization. I'm the president of Strong Towns. We are about advocating for a development model that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. Our organization began as a blog. We added a podcast. We still do that every weekday, and I'll give you that website at the end. But it began as a conversation, much like your conversation is going on here. It began as a discussion about how do we make our cities better, and how do we help them become more successful, stronger, more resilient, and serve us better. I want to start this conversation by having you think about the way we built cities thousands of years ago. These are two artist renderings. The one on the left is an ancient city called Ur. It's in the Fertile Crescent, 6000 BC. The one on the right, of course, is ancient Rome. If you think about the way these cities were designed and built and laid out, they were built around the dominant transportation technology of the day. That, of course, being your 2 feet, right? People walked everywhere they went, and so the layout, the design, the scale, the spacing between different buildings was all based around a society of people who walked. You can fast forward thousands of years to my hometown. I live in Brainerd, Minnesota, right in the heart of Brainerd's lake, or Minnesota's Central Lakes region. This is what it looked like back in 1904. Again, people would arrive here by stagecoach, they'd arrive here by train, but when they got here, they got out and they used that timeless transportation technology, their own 2 feet, to get around everywhere they went. And so the spacing between buildings, the scale of things, the way things were laid out was all very similar to what we had seen in societies for thousands and thousands of years. Beginning in the early 1900s and then accelerating after World War II, we began to build cities around a different transportation technology, that of course being the automobile. If you ask people to explain this transition, they'll generally talk about it in terms of progress. We used to be a civilization that walked everywhere, so we built cities around people who walked. Now we are a civilization of people who drive everywhere, so we build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around people with jet cars. And someday we will teleport, and our cities will look entirely different than they do today. A narrative of progress. And that's very affirming to us because we like to think of ourselves on this continual chain of things always getting better. There's another way to look at this, though, that isn't quite as comforting. And I want to plant this seed in the back of your mind as we start to have this conversation today. When we look at these ancient cities and we consider how they were built, we have to understand that by the time they got to this point here, humans had been building cities for thousands of years. They tried things. What worked, they would expand upon. What didn't work, they would throw away, get rid of. And over thousands of years and thousands of different iterations, they came up with a building style and an approach that was strong and resilient, that would withstand the wars and times of peace, withstand drought and flood, withstand feast or famine. They came up with a building form that was highly attuned to who we were as people and was proven to be strong and resilient. Fast forward to my hometown again, this same development pattern we see in places all over the world, in different cultures and different continents and different latitudes, and even in places where today we say people won't walk because it's too cold, right? They did back then. They did back then. When we look at this style of development, even though this seems very normal to us, this seems like the way things have always been done, it's important to understand that this is a very, very young experiment. People have not been doing this that long. The ideas for building this way didn't come about by thousands of iterations of trial and error. We imported some very intelligent concepts from European lecture halls on how we should do zoning, and how we should do hierarchical road networks, and all the different things that are commonplace here today. But it's not like we tried it out for a century in Minnesota to see if it would work and then bring it over here to North Dakota, right? We just did this everywhere across a whole continent all at once in an incredibly short period of time. We are living today in one of the greatest experiments that's ever been tried. A social experiment, a cultural experiment, a political experiment, and a financial experiment that we're just now starting to understand some of the implications of. When we look at the way we grow and build our cities today, we primarily use three mechanisms to finance that development. The first is transfer payments between governments. The idea that the state and federal government, as our partners in creating growth and jobs and economic development, do things like provide us with revenue, give us grants, give us loans, make projects. The second is transportation spending. The idea that we would use our collective resources to build things like highways and interchanges and frontage roads, that these would not only create jobs while they're being built, but would also create a platform where we could have additional growth afterward. The third mechanism is debt. And while public debt is an important part of the conversation, even more important is private debt. The ability of individuals and businesses to get loans at low rates, to have them sold off on secondary markets, to have them securitized and bought by pension funds all over the world, creates an enormous amount of liquidity in our system. You look at these mechanisms of growth, we use them to create growth within our communities. And of course, as cities, as local governments, this is really important because it gives us the revenue that we need to do the things that we want to do. This is kind of city administration 101. It's important to understand the powerful incentives at play here. When we build cities the way we do today with these mechanisms of growth, the initial cost to us as taxpayers is fairly minimal. Yes, as a local government, we may have to pay to upsize a pipe or expand a road beyond what it would normally need or what it would need for the immediate need because of future considerations. But the cost of the buildings, the cost of most of the stuff that's spent is stuff that we don't have to pay for as taxpayers directly. The benefit that we get, however, is substantial. Now we have all this new tax revenue coming in. When we're growing, we become more wealthy. Everything feels really great. The catch is that as part of these transactions, we agree as a city, we agree as a community to take on the long-term responsibility of servicing and maintaining all of these places. We promise that we will fix the streets and the sidewalks and the roads, the curbs, the pipes, the pumps, the valves, the meters, everything that is needed. We take that on as a long-term obligation. We, in a sense, exchange a near-term benefit in cash for a long-term liability. There's only one of two ways that this strategy makes any sense. Either growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates. There's always going to be that much more new growth we can create to get the immediate cash to pay off all the promises we made a generation ago. Or the pattern of development, the way we actually go about building, is going to create for us more wealth and prosperity than it generates for us expense. Now, we've all been around long enough to realize that the first assumption is not true. Even if it were mathematically true, which it's not possible, which it's not, we've lived through enough of this where we know we're not going to grow infinitely forever, right? Unfortunately, this second assumption is also not true. And this is where, for a brief period of this presentation, I'm going to get a little bit technical. I am an engineer, so I have to do some of that. I promise it won't be too painful. One of the things that we did early on at Strong Towns was to take a look at the different aspects of our development pattern and try to discern from that the financial implications of the way we were building. This is the most simple kind of development you'll find. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. When it was built in the mid-1990s, it had a gravel road. The city went out and paved it. The cost to do that was $6,600 per property. We asked the question, all right, based on the revenue the city's getting from the people that live within this development, the only people that substantively use this road in any way, how long is it going to take the city to recoup the 50% match that they spent to pave that road? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city that long just to break even on the project. This is a slightly more intense development. You can see, again, this is a closed loop development with a dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic. There's no commercial traffic here. This is just a residential development. This was built in the early 1980s. The road had completely fallen apart. The city went out and fixed it. It was $354,000. We asked the question, all right, based on the revenue that we collect from the people who live within this development, the only people who substantively use this road in any way, how long is it going to take the city to recoup what they just spent to fix it? The answer is 79 years. We then asked the question, all right, let's say we were going to try to collect enough revenue from these people between now and the time the road fell apart to actually have the money to fix it. What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. Now, sometimes people say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We know we lose money on residential. We make it up on commercial. Commercials are cash cow. To which my response is always, all right, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up on the last 10%. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would think that that was a wise strategy. Nonetheless, we've culturally come to this notion that if we just have enough commercial property, it doesn't matter what else is going on in our city. This is a business park. This is one of those build it and they will come kind of investments. This was built in the mid-1990s. It was so successful, every lot was built upon. And what the city wanted to do was repeat it, just build the exact same thing on property they owned right next door. We asked the question, all right, if we could build the same thing for the same cost and get the same amount of investment, would that be a good project? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million to build. There's $6.6 million of private investment that's taken place. Now, pause here for a second. Of that $6.6 million, 4 of those lots are a church. 2 of the lots are a public school district bus maintenance facility. 1 is a county maintenance garage. 1 is a city maintenance garage. These are all important facilities that a community needs, but none of them pay any taxes to the city. Of the remaining lots, the ones that are theoretically private sector taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move into that park. For the sake of our analysis, we assumed that every single lot would be built on by a full, non-subsidized tax-paying entity, that the entire park would be built out within 1 year, and that every single penny of new revenue would go to pay off that $2.1 million investment. If that were the case, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, to break even. That's 29 years where everybody's taxes would need to go up to pay to plow the streets and mow the ditches, provide police protection, fire protection, and every other service that would be needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic scenario. We did dozens of these, and I'll encourage you to go to our website if you're interested and look at some of these case studies. But let me show you what's going on. And again, I apologize for being an engineer. I like graphs. It's a weakness. I'll walk you through them. There's 4 graphs on this presentation. They won't be too hard, I promise. Let's say that a developer comes to town. Says, I have this piece of property I'd like to build upon. I'm willing to go out and build all the required infrastructure. I'll build the roads and streets and the pipes and everything that's needed. I'll pay for that. I will build all the homes, all the commercial properties. I will follow all of your rules. I don't want any subsidies at all. The only thing I'm asking as a developer is that when I'm done building all this stuff, that I be able to turn it over to you, the city, to maintain. What would we say? We'd say, fantastic, right? You mean we spend nothing and we get all this new growth? But let's say that we're, prudent North Dakota people. We're pragmatic. We've heard of this strong town stuff. We want to do the right thing. So when the new revenue from this development comes in, what we're going to do is take the portion that would normally go towards maintaining stuff, and we're just going to set that aside. And every year when the revenue from that development comes in, we'll set that aside and we'll allow it to grow and accumulate so that when we get out a generation from now and we have to make good on that promise that we will fix and maintain and take care of all this stuff, we'll have a pot of money to do it. This is what that looks like. Sorry to our dude in the back changing the screen. In year 1, new revenue comes in. We set that aside. In year 2, we add to what we had in year 1. In year 3, it's a little more. Year 4, year 5, and on and on and on. You can see from a cash flow standpoint, everything is positive for a long, long time, right? A brand new road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. But you can see in this model, when we get out to year 25, and we have to actually go out and fix that stuff that we promised a generation ago we would fix, what we find is that the cumulative amount of revenue coming in is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, we run far into the negative. How do cities deal with this? They try to get more growth, right? What if our developer comes back in a couple years later and says, that development worked really well for me, worked really well for you. I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point forward, a developer walks in the door with a similar size development proposal. In other words, the ideal scenario, nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that money and we set it aside and we save it for the day when we have to make good on our promises. This is what that looks like. In year 1, you have your first development paying in. It pays in for 25 years. In year 3, you add a second development, year 5, year 7. And you can see, not only is each development paying in with no cost out to you, because everything's brand new, right? But with growth upon growth upon growth, you actually have accelerating cash. You're feeling very, very rich. And when you get to year 25, the year you have to make good on that promise you made way back in year 1, you've got to spend a little money, sure, but it's all right. You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money on every project that you do, the further you go out into the time horizon, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to the question, why are our cities, despite having so much growth, finding it so difficult to do just basic things? Why, even in places where we've seen cities be wildly successful and have double-digit growth for decades, are they not able to do things like fix sidewalks, patch potholes, keep public safety employees staffed? It's because we've exchanged near-term cash benefits for long-term obligations, and we're now in that long term. Now, a lot of people like to say, well, city people are incompetent, right? They don't know what they're doing, or city staff are lazy, or our public officials are corrupt. But what you're looking at in this graph is none of that, right? What you're looking at is human nature. This is why people smoke, right? There's a benefit today and a cost way in the future. I like Mountain Dew. This is why people drink Mountain Dew, right? I enjoy it today. Sometime in the future, what? Heart disease, right? But I don't think about that when I'm having my Mountain Dew for the day, right? This is natural human behavior. Here's the last graph. And this is a graph of debt. And it's going to explain a little bit how we overcame the first bit of drag that we experienced from this development pattern. And you can shut this graph off on the screen for a little bit because I got to tell this. Everybody in this room understands the conversation we're having at the national level about our debt, right? Our federal debt is enormous, $20 trillion. It's an unfathomable sum of money. When I was a kid, we had the Weekly Reader in school. In 4th grade, I remember reading the Weekly Reader, a little breakout box. It said if you took the national debt and converted it into dollar bills, it would go to the moon and back 20-some time, right? As if for a 4th grader, replacing one abstract concept with another abstract concept would clarify things, right? These are enormous, enormous numbers, beyond our ability to comprehend. I'll take that chart again. When we look at this chart, the bottom line, the blue one, is the growth in our national debt. That's the huge number. The one right above it is the growth rate of our GDP. That green one, the one that soars up like that, that's our private sector debt. That's debt that we share. That's residential mortgages, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans, private sector debt. The way we financed the first generation of this new experimental way to transform our continents and build our cities was by taking our savings and by reinvesting that illusion of wealth back into creating more growth. When that became insufficient to keep everything going, when the liabilities started to pile up, and you can think like mid-1970s, early 1980s, right? There started to be a drag in our economy. What did we do? We eventually shifted from a model of growth through savings and investment to growth through debt accumulation. And debt accumulation has become such an important part of driving our economy that as we cross over into the 3rd generation of this new experimental way to build, we actually allowed it to become predatory. We actually allowed systems to arise that said, you don't need a down payment. You don't need to show you can make a payment. You don't even have to have a job. We needed the growth so badly that we allowed our financial system to prey on our neighbors. Our ability to continue to grow in this way is severely, severely limited. There's some huge implications, obviously, here. The mechanisms of growth we become accustomed to are waning. The federal, state governments, the DOTs, the private sector are all maxed out on the amount that they can continue to prop up cities. What this means is that local governments, us, we're going to be forced to absorb the cost of our development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that money is going to come from us. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, I wasn't invited here to tell you what you already know, right? Everybody, every level of government is having this debate now. How big is the tax increase going to be? Who's going to pay for it? How deep is the service cut going to be? And where is it going to be felt? It is critical that we see the third variable in that sentence, the third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in a way that is functionally insolvent, there's no way that our cities are going to avoid becoming insolvent. As long as we continue to build with an approach that gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way that our cities are going to avoid default. Whether that is a hard default, like we see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in thousands of cities around this country, where they're laying off firefighters, laying off police officers, putting off critical maintenance, and deferring other obligations because they simply don't have the money. We have to start a conversation about how we build places that are financially productive. So what's the solution? And in talking to places around the country, I very quickly figured out that one of the problems we have as a nation is talking about solutions. Because solution generally means, what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing, right? We pretty much tried all those. At Strong Towns, we don't talk about solutions. What we talk about is rational responses. How do intelligent, thoughtful, rational people respond to this complex set of challenges that lie in front of us? And when I talk about rational responses, I always start with this photo here. This again is my hometown, Brainerd, Minnesota, back in 1904. I live 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul today. This is what the city looked like over 100 years ago. Look at this. As a planner, I'm just amazed by this photo. I look at the way the buildings line up, the way they frame the public realm at just the exact right Greco-Roman ratios to create good space. There's great segmentation of the public realm. The buildings themselves have great symmetry. They front the street perfectly. This is a beautiful, beautifully designed street. Let me ask you some questions about these people. How thick was their zoning code? How many boards and committees did they have to go to get an approval to build something? How many federal grants did they get? How many miles of pipe and road did they build to try to attract new growth? How many state programs did they tap into? How many engineers and planners and economic development advisors did they have on staff telling them what to do? Right? These people had none of the things that we insist are absolutely essential to building a great place. Yet look at what they built. Look at what they built. These people didn't even have 30-year mortgages. They were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. Yet they built a place that was spectacular. How did they do this? How did they do this? It's really simple. They just copied what they knew worked. They took the materials they had on hand and they copied what people had done for thousands and thousands of years. Put that photo back up if you wouldn't mind. After 60 years of our new experimental way to build, after 60 years of advice from engineers and planners and economic development officials on how to create great places, after all the subsidies and grants and loans and all the things we do to create growth, here's what this exact same street looks like today. It's a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. And if you want to understand in one photo why our cities are struggling financially, understand that there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that street. Where is the wealth that sustains that generation after generation after generation? I was giving a lecture at a university in Boise, Idaho, and I showed that slide, and a student raised their hand, stood up and said, "Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you build. When we build, we have to build one block at a time. And before we build the next block, we have to fill in every gap on the block we just built. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We're a very poor country. We can't afford to build this way." We're a very poor country now, too. We can't afford to build this way either. And for a long time, that illusion of wealth made us think that this kind of thing didn't matter. That we could have blocks and blocks and blocks of empty vacant spaces of things that didn't have any wealth creation or any payback or anything at all. And it didn't matter because we were so filthy rich we could just ignore that. But we can't ignore it. We have to start a conversation about how to make better use of what we built. So how do we start to do this? The first thing is to stop the worst of the bad habits, right? Build it and they will come is a fantastic movie plot. It is a horrible economic development strategy. As cities today, we are expected to be the dumb money at the card table. We are expected to be the ones to step in and make everything happen. If you want to be a player as a city today, you have to have the shovel-ready site, you have to have the infrastructure out there, you have to have millions on the line in the hopes that growth will show up. And when growth shows up, if they don't have enough money, you have to be there with the subsidies to make it happen. You have to do the gap, you've got to fill it all in, you've got to make it happen. This is not how cities build wealth. And it's not how cities have ever built wealth. I am going to show you how cities become wealthy. Do any of you recognize this place here? Take a close look. Does it ring a bell to any of you? If I told you it was Grand Forks, would that surprise you? No, because Grand Forks started out just like this, right? If I told you this was San Francisco, would it surprise you? Or Manhattan, or Chicago, or Dallas? Maybe the trees would give it away, that's not Dallas. This is my hometown in 1870. This is Brainerd, Minnesota, Front Street. Front Street 30 years later would look like this. But in 1870 it looked like this. A bunch of little pop-up shacks. A few people's hopes and dreams, right? We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. It just didn't work out. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market drop 25%? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out Wall Street banks? No. A few people lose a little bit of money, they salvage what they can, and they move on to the next city. For a variety of reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even fully comprehend after the fact, many of these places were successful. It was the right people in the right place at the right time. All those complex variables came together. And when they were successful, they would grow in a very predictable and understandable way. You can put that photo back up. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. So after 30 years of incremental growth, these little pop-up shacks would be replaced by these 2- and 3-story wood structures. And as the city continued to grow incrementally up and incrementally out and become incrementally more intense, these wood structures 40 years later would become buildings with brick and granite facades. We don't build wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth is to make small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. Let me show you how productive this style of development is. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see they're the exact same size, the exact same area, the exact same amount of public infrastructure. They abut the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development that's upon them. That old and blighted block looks like this. It's the 1920s version of that pop-up block. Remember that 1870s block? As my city was growing incrementally out, the next 3 increments of out were these 3 blocks. So what you're looking at there is the cheapest thing you could have built in the 1920s. And if things had progressed as they normally would have, what would have happened here? You would have had a 2nd story, maybe a 3rd story. Ultimately, over time, it would have grown and become more intense. But that's not what happened, right? We had the Depression, we had World War II, and then we had a completely different style of development that just jumped right over this. This block has stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. But the city labeled it blighted, had it torn down, and now we've got the drive-through taco joint. Everybody thought this was a fantastic transaction. We got rid of blight. What's going in meets the new zoning code, meets the parking ratios, the sign ordinance. We got the on-street parking out of the way so the cars move more quickly. We added a little bit of green space, a sidewalk. It's wonderful, but nobody bothered to look at the math. That old and blighted block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny new block that replaced one just like it has a value of only $800,000. We're actually collecting 42% more taxes from that old, rundown, junky block. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional development pattern, the way our ancestors around the world built for thousands and thousands of years in its infancy after 90 years of neglect. And it still outperforms by a wide margin the shiny and new stuff brand new. And we all know the trajectory of the taco joint, right? We've all been around long enough to see this. In 20 years, that will be a used car lot. 10 years later, we'll be boarded up and they'll be selling drugs out the back, and the city will be trying to get a grant to have it torn down, right? In fact, we did this analysis in 2012. Here's what's happened in the 2 years subsequent. There's now a 78% difference between the two. The traditional style of development is incredibly productive financially and very resilient, while our new experimental style development is not productive, has a very limited upside potential, and has a downside potential that is incredibly fragile. We see the same thing on the edge of town. This is our Mills Fleet Farm. My hometown is the home of Mills Fleet Farm, so we have the biggest one in the world. It's our double big box store. There's also an auto dealership and a gas station. It's a 20-acre piece of property, the most valuable piece of property in the entire Brainerd Lakes area. This is 20 acres of our core downtown. It's not nearly as nice as your downtown. We try, but most of the second and third stories are unoccupied. A lot of the first stories are unoccupied as well. There's been no new buildings built there in my lifetime. Yet when we look at these out on the edge of town in our best, highest production property, we're getting $0.6 million an acre. But when we go to our rundown, decrepit downtown, we're 78% more than that at $1.1 million an acre. Think of how much money we had to invest to get that Mills Fleet Farm. Over $100 million in the bypass, $30 million to run sewer out there, $20 million to run water. When I was an engineer, I actually designed the road that ran behind it. That was $2.5 million just for that. Frontage roads, the side roads, all this stuff. How much did we spend, my generation, to get the wealth in that downtown? Nothing. That was an endowment that my great-great-grandparents and their peers built slowly and incrementally over time and bequeathed to us as a wealth-generating asset that would pay out year after year after year. I want to show you, and this is a 3D model, I'm going to show you a series of them now, of cities that have gone through distress. This is Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, New York is one of these cities that was completely hollowed out after World War II. They've had population loss every census since 1940. The downtown has been destroyed, hollowed out. There's not a lot there. It's a struggling place. It's trying to come back, but it's not an example of a great, vibrant downtown. Yet, when we look at the value per acre, where is the wealth in this community? What you're going to see in the vertical, the higher it goes up, the more wealthy it is, the more valuable the property is. Can you pick out where the traditional downtown is? It's that purple and red stuff right there that just jumps out at you. That's the power of a downtown, even one that's not doing great. These are places that create massive amounts of wealth. There's a reason our ancestors built this way. They built this way because it was incredibly productive. This is a little bit smaller city in upstate New York, Williamsville. We see the same type of pattern where you have walkable downtowns. We have surrounding neighborhoods. It dwarfs everything that we built in the auto area in terms of financial productivity. This is a small little town near where I live, Crosby, Minnesota. I was doing some work with them, and they were showing me where they thought their good development was and the neighborhoods that they wanted to tear down because they thought they were substandard. Yet when we showed them where their wealth was in the community, it was in the neighbors that they identified as the poor ones that they wanted to go away. There's a reason our ancestors built this way. It is incredibly, incredibly productive. We've been working with the city of Lafayette, Louisiana for about a year now, and last week we were able to publish a map that details the parts of the city that are cash flow positive and the parts of the city that are cash flow negative. Where is the city's wealth being generated? Where is the city's expenses being created? I don't have a pointer, so I can't point this out to you, so I'm going to try to describe to you what you're looking at. Every place where you see green going up, the city is bringing in more money than it spends. Everywhere where you see red going up, and the further it goes up, the worse it is, that is the more money they're spending than they're bringing in. All of that green area is in the core downtown. Except for a little part of it there on the right side, on the east side, which is their poorest, struggling neighborhoods in town. All of the stuff in red, especially the stuff on the far left there in the upper, that's the big box stores, that's the mall, that's the stuff that is supposed to be bringing everybody the wealth, right? But when we actually look at the costs to serve that and the costs to make that happen and the revenues that we're getting, these are the places that are making the city bleed red ink. In Lafayette, if you own a $150,000 house, you pay the city about $1,500 a year in taxes. In order to maintain all the roads that they built, your taxes would need to go up $3,300 a year, just to maintain what they already have. This is a pattern we see in city after city after city all over the country. Our downtowns are the places that are generating our wealth. Let me see what this looks like. Here's in North Carolina, we did another mall. This is the Kmart, $384,000 an acre. This is a Walmart, almost $1 million an acre. This is the kind of thing that our current development mindset says this is like the pinnacle of development. The more of these we can get, the wealthier we're going to be. Yet when we look in the core downtown, we see an old warehouse that was converted into a supper club, $5 million an acre. And my favorite one, Jimmy's Pizza House, $3.5 million an acre. Now Jonathan was out here and he showed you some photos of all this vacant land that you have and all this underutilized space that you have. I'm going to ask you, is there the competency in Grand Forks to build a Jimmy's Pizza in one of those places, right? Do we have what it takes inside of us? Do we have the sophistication necessary to build a little box? Of course we do. Of course we do, right? This is easy stuff if we actually set out to do it. But imagine if we looked at all those gaps that we have in our landscape, where we have roads and streets and sidewalks and curb and sewer and water and all the stuff that we need. And we said our goal is not to bring in a Walmart, not to hit the home run, as Jonathan said, but to hit a single. And a single might be Jimmy's Pizza, right? It might be the next smallest increment of development. Can we do that? You bet we can. And if we do that month after month, year after year, we're going to be building more wealth in our community than you can possibly imagine. And think this through for a second. Where's the wealth in these transactions going? And I don't have a problem with Walmart and Kmart. Walmart and Kmart are perfectly adapted to the rules that we have created. They've looked at the rules that we've created, the way we've chosen to build our cities, the things we've chosen to subsidize and fund, and they've said, we're going to be perfectly adapted to that. If you don't like Walmart and Kmart, you don't like the rules of the game. Where does the wealth from these transactions go? Where does the wealth from the transactions at Jimmy's Pizza go? A donut shop is about the easiest thing to start, right? You need a cash register, a counter, a deep fryer. It's a pretty low intense business from a capital standpoint. If you want to start a donut shop, it's pretty easy to go do it, right? Unless you know that Dunkin' Donuts is coming to town. And then you wouldn't dare start a donut shop because they're going to overwhelm you with advertising and signage and drive-throughs and all the stuff that they do, because they're perfectly adapted to our business model. But if you want to start a Dunkin' Donuts, you need $500,000 of liquid net worth just to sit at the table with the franchise people. Are we creating opportunities or barriers? We can have a development pattern that makes us wealthy and also creates tremendous opportunity for our people. There's one last concept I want to leave you with, and it comes from Silicon Valley. It's the notion that innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. We need a lot of innovation in our cities, but we as people have an incredibly strong preference. We prefer smart over dumb, right? Everybody will say that. But we have an incredibly strong, irresistible preference for orderly over chaotic. So much so that we are willing to tolerate a lot of dumb in order to have orderly. Let me show you what this looks like from a city standpoint. This is the city of Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is a fantastic city, and I've been very fortunate to work with them. But Memphis has followed all the prescriptions of the post-World War II development pattern, and it hasn't helped them. They built the highways through the middle of the city. They tore down buildings in order to make that happen. They ripped down buildings in order to build parking. They subsidized businesses to move to Memphis. They subsidized businesses to stay in Memphis. They extended sewer and water out and kept annexing land and building stuff further and further out. They closed their neighborhood schools, built regional schools out on the edge. They eventually moved out so far they built a second beltway. And in the 1980s, they tried to get the home run. They tried to swing for the fences by landing a basketball team by building a pyramid-shaped stadium on the Mississippi River. Now, they were able to get a basketball team. They got the Memphis Grizzlies. But when the Grizzlies came to town, they didn't like this stadium. And so Memphis wound up building them a new stadium a few blocks away from here. This one sat empty for 15 years. And after $200 million of site prep work and another $36 million of direct subsidy, last week it opened as the world's biggest Bass Pro Shop. Orderly but dumb. Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is also in Memphis, Tennessee. This is an old streetcar stop on a street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue used to be a streetcar stop. In the 1950s, they ripped the streetcar out. They put a highway in through the middle of the neighborhood. This place just died. A few years ago, some neighbors, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, took matters into their own hands. They worked with the landlords to sweep out the buildings. They swept up the sidewalks. They went and got paint from the hardware store. They put in bike lanes. They put in crosswalks. They invited businesses to come in for a weekend just to show people what it could look like. They opened up an art gallery. They opened up a bike shop. They opened up a clothier. They had a taco stand. They had an ice cream shop. They had all these little things going on to fill up those storefronts and just show people this is what this street could be like. And when they got done, it wasn't, amazing, but it was a heck of a lot nicer than what it was when they started. They didn't go ask permission. They figured, if anybody gets upset with us, we're going to be gone before they even show up, right? I wasn't here when they did this, but I was out here 6 months later. When I was out here, every single storefront was filled. And I talked to one of the landlords, and he told me he was able to charge double the amount of rent for the last place that filled than what he was asking before the project. The city's since documented $12 million of property value appreciation, 18 new businesses, and 30 new jobs in these 2 blocks. What was the total public investment? 0. Chaotic, but smart. Now, I don't know what Grand Forks would do if you guys went out and started painting crosswalks, right? I can tell you what my city would do. Monday morning, the engineer would be out there, those lines not perfectly straight. They get the power washer out. We got all this liability. We got to get rid of this. And then send the cop over to give Marone a ticket, right? We have no tolerance for this. But Memphis is desperate. And their desperation has made them really, really smart. And so what did Memphis do? Memphis went out with power washers and got rid of this, but only after they had a plan to put it back permanently. You see, Memphis understands that they could have all the visioning sessions in the world, all the planning processes, all the public hearings, all the visioning charts on the wall, and they never would have identified this as the highest returning project. But their residents did. And because their residents did, their job as a city now is to make sure it never goes backward. So they went out and put this in permanently. And Memphis is so smart, when they were out there putting this in permanently, they said, you know what? We're here. We got the trucks with the paint. Why don't we just make this another couple blocks in each direction? Maybe some of the love going on here will ooze into the surrounding neighborhoods, right? A small incremental investment in their future. If it works out, awesome. If it doesn't, what are you out? A little bit of paint? A few minutes worth of time? They're redoing that highway that cut the neighborhood in half. After this project, they actually sat down and said, whoa, hang on a sec. We need to do some things in these 2 blocks to try to reconnect this neighborhood so we can get some flow back and forth. There's good stuff happening here. Let's build on that. They didn't go out to try to build a $3 million pedestrian overpass, right? They didn't throw tons of money at it. What they did is they just made modest little adjustments to slow the traffic down and improve the pedestrian flow. Small incremental investments. See what works. We were so inspired by the Memphis story that in my hometown, we started a group called A Better Brainerd. We spent a year working in a neighborhood. We had block parties, we had bike rides, we had scavenger hunts. We would spend time just out in the neighborhood observing where people struggled day to day. We saw the mom walking through the ditch with the stroller, weeds up to her waist. What are you doing? Well, I've got to get to the grocery store. I don't have a car. It doesn't feel safe to walk on the street, so I'm walking here. We saw case after case after case like this. And after a year, we put together a report called Neighborhoods First, documenting 8 different projects the city could do, small little incremental things that would address where we saw people struggling throughout this city. Put in a crosswalk here. Put in a bike lane here. Plant a row of trees over here. My city right now is in the process of spending over $7 million to run sewer and water out 1.5 miles to the airport, to build a business park out at the airport that would be air-oriented. We already have a business park built in the 90s, it's only half full, but this one would be air-oriented. That's their big economic development initiative. The total cost of our 8 projects, $16,700. What happens if we go out and we do these 8 projects and there's no response? No one thinks the neighborhood is any better. No one's day is made any better. No one says, you know, this neighborhood is kind of up and coming. I think I want to buy a house here. Or I think I want to move here. Or I think I want to invest in this neighborhood. What if we go out and like nothing, we put a crosswalk in and nobody uses it? We put a bike lane in, nobody bikes. What happens then? We're out $16,700. And we've learned 8 things that don't work. And so next year, we go out and we try 8 new things. And we do this year after year after year after year until we've made this neighborhood, through incremental investments, a fantastic place to be. Put that photo back up for a sec. I talked to the city engineer and I said, you know, I think you could use a sidewalk here. Yeah. Do you know what he said? Why would you say that, Chuck? We'll never identify the highest returning investments in our community sitting behind a desk, having a public hearing, doing a survey. The only way we'll identify the highest returning investments in our community is to go out there, to walk it, to be in there, to look at where people are struggling, and to ask one simple question: what is the next smallest thing I can do to make this a little bit better? And if we do that day after day, year after year, not only will we be making our towns financially strong and resilient, but we'll be improving people's lives along the way. Thank you so much. How are we doing?
Thank you very much. Great job. No.
Okay.
No, we're going to have you up here. Thank you very much, Chuck, for all of the information. I can tell you that from experience, I'm guessing there's probably some people that we meet with on a regular basis with some departments that would call us chaotic coming in.
Hopefully, yeah.
But now we have a word for it. It's smart. And now we can say that.
Well, you have so many businesses in the downtown, and I think the interesting thing is that they all understand this, right?
Yeah.
Because none of them change over their inventory all in one day.
No.
Like, let's try something brand new. What do? They put out something little and see if it takes. If it takes, they expand it.
Yeah.
That's the mentality that we can have as, people developing and building a great place. We have that same mentality.
Absolutely. And it only makes sense, obviously. Our small businesses, the people that make their homes in the downtown, locally owned, the money stays here. When you look at everything else, it's not going to necessarily stay here. We need them, but we want to make sure that we patronize those that are going to the money's going to stay local.
Absolutely.
I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions since Chuck is here. Fantastic presentation. Let's give him another round, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm actually really pleased that you brought up Memphis at the end. I actually had the pleasure of doing a report on Memphis a couple of years ago.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. I was able to visit with some of the leaders who have been involved in working on some of these things. And I know that one area that they really looked to when they were trying to find ways to direct, not investment, direct their efforts now that they were seeing things happen, was they wanted to tie it to data so that they made sure they were getting good return on investment and that it would be sustainable. I was wondering if you had any insight on what a community like Grand Forks can do to make sure we're looking at the right data when we're looking at new investments.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I showed you some maps, some like visual bling that we've done modeling around the country. I think a lot of what we do as city governments, and I was talking to one of your council members, and she seems like such a nice person, and she says, "Oh, we're getting into budget season. It's my second time through," and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I hated watching that happen," because cities budget year to year, right? We don't do 5-year budgets, we don't do 10-year budgets, and we don't rely on all the data that we have to help us make good long-term strategic decisions. I used to do comprehensive plans for cities and engineering for cities, and we were always kind of flying by the seat of our pants. When we start to look at cities, and I'm a huge advocate of the open source movement. To me, every city needs to make all their data, which is public data, as open and available as possible, because what happens then is that people in the community start to make use of it. And they start to point things out, and they start to figure things out that maybe people stuck in the way they do things are not seeing, right? And we have a good exchange of ideas. But to me, the number one set of data that we can use is that basic productivity data like we put together for Memphis. Where are you getting the highest value per acre? And when you look at that, and the reason that's such a good indicator of success is that value per acre is not only how much wealth is being generated there, but it's also a good proxy for how much expense the city has. When you look at that, you will see, because we've done this in 4 plus different communities, we just see the same thing time and time again, where you have a downtown that's walkable, and where you have adjacent neighborhoods that have some bit of a traditional development pattern, those places will pop off the map, because those from a city are your highest returning investments. Those are the places that are generating all the wealth, those are the places that are paying all the taxes, and those are the places that we need to be investing in, because those are the places that are paying an incredibly high return back to the city. So start with that basic, like assessor's data is what you're looking at, and basic math, value per acre, and it will illuminate lots and lots of things for you as you look to make investment choices in your city.
Terrific. Do we have any other questions from the audience for Chuck? And I know he will be available too if you're interested in going to the social afterwards. It's going to be at the Brick and Barley Restaurant.
Can I? Go ahead. I was going to say it.
Hi, thank you. Just a couple of things. I used to be on the city council, and we do have opengov.com. I don't know if you're familiar, so we put that in.
Yeah.
My question is on your development, when you look at a business park, in your calculation of 29-year payback for the city, did you take into consideration the employment that can generate with the sales tax, with people that buy homes and in turn pay property tax? Or did you just look at the development? Thank you.
Yeah. I don't want to push back too hard. That's a beautiful theory, and I get that kind of, that question comes up every now and then. Okay, Chuck, the business park might not cash flow for 30 years at a best case scenario, wildly optimistic scenario. But what about all the jobs that are created? Don't those people build homes and stuff? Yeah, that was the first two examples I showed you, because they're building homes in subdivisions that are also losing money. So it's like an accelerating loss, right? And when we include the sales tax, like we did in the Lafayette example, what you see is that the sales tax reinforces the findings of the value per acre. The traditional development pattern is generating greater sales tax as well. So I think we have to demystify the notion that this is one huge economic ecosystem, and even if we lose money here, we'll make it back magically somewhere over here, because every place where we've measured it, and even when we put it together in one big macro measurement, that theory does not hold. And if that theory held, why are we would see fantastic growth and returns all over the place. I think that is a belief we tell ourselves because it's comforting and affirming, but it's not grounded in reality. And I think the data is what I would rely on more than that sense. So in short, yes, we've calculated that because it shows up in the other parts of the system. Someone moves to town, they build in a subdivision, that subdivision loses you money. If they have a job in town, it doesn't make that subdivision lose you less money. If they move to a productive place where your development pattern makes you money, well, now we'd have a different thing, but you're not building productive places, you're building places that lose you money. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I was wondering about some tactics and ways you can make the argument for more Jimmy's Pizza Houses. Speaking briefly from personal experience, I was essentially laughed out of a meeting with a commercial lender because my loan was so small. How can you have a profitable business when you only want $30,000? Right. And I was kind of ushered to the door. Yeah. So how do you encourage more Jimmy's Pizza Houses to happen? And if you're talking about slimmer codes, how do you encourage that instead of just the canned answer of, well, less regulation and they'll build it? Right.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And the answer to it is actually multifaceted and very complex, because what you're talking about is a vast web of things that come together to prop up the current development pattern and really squash the traditional development pattern. I'll give you one example. FHA rules require that if you're going to get a federally backed loan and you're going to have a mixed-use building, so a building, think of the traditional downtown building where you have retail on the bottom and residential on the top, right? Very simple Jimmy's Pizza-esque kind of box. You have to have 20% maximum commercial in order to qualify for FHA funding for that. What that means, because all the other underwriting is based off of FHA criteria, even if you're not getting an FHA loan, there's no secondary market for that product. And so a bank has to finance it locally. And so all of a sudden you need huge amounts down. They want, it's risky for them because there's no market they can pawn it off to. They're going to charge you a higher interest rate. They're going to do a shorter term loan. And when you go to the realtor's going to say, don't do this because I don't know if you're going to be able to sell it again, because whoever buys this is going to have the same exact constraints. All of that from one federal rule. This is a myriad of complexities, and I can't say that there's an easy solution for this. All I can say is that you've got a downtown business group, you've got people in the community that want this to happen. To me, what I would do, and we just had a meeting with a really great group of developers in Fargo, and I told them the same thing. Ask yourself, how do we get that box? And what are the obstacles there? And what you're going to find is that the pioneer, you're going to have to join together as a community and rip down all those obstacles. You're going to have to clear a path. But once you clear a path for that first person, the next one, the next one, the next one will follow behind. You have to be committed to that as a group, as a society, as a culture, to have that happen. If you think back to the 1940s and this new experiment that we were going on how to build cities around the automobile, you got to know that there were a bunch of people sitting around going, that would be really smart to do, but all of our codes and regulations and bureaucracy and everything is not geared up around to do it. How do we fix that? And what happened? A whole society of people said, that's what we want to do. And all of a sudden, all those obstacles became cleared out of the way. You will not have someone from an ivory tower or a think tank or a nonprofit group come to you and give you like a 10-point prescription for here's the things you do to move all these obstacles out of the way. The only way you'll do it is by pushing through them here, getting a team together of people that are committed to making it happen, and then clearing the path for everybody else to come behind you. So you're a pioneer, and I admire you. Go back to that bank with your $30,000 request and say, look, I'm not going away. This will work. This will make you money as a bank. Let's do this. And all of you go there with them and say, we want this to happen. Please.
I'm wondering how affordable housing fits into this mix. We've talked a lot about commercial.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things that I want to say about affordable housing that are really important. First, when we do the analysis and we start to look at the neighborhoods that are paying more in taxes and the neighborhoods that are receiving all the subsidy, it's not the way you would think. It's kind of counterintuitive. Generally, it's the poorer neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that we look at as being the old and blighted and in decline, that on a per acre basis are generating way, way more taxes than the stuff that we see out on the edge that we're building for a generally more affluent population. I sat down with the mayor of Memphis and showed him how his poorest neighborhoods were subsidizing his wealthiest neighborhoods. So when we're talking about affordable housing, one of the very first things we can do is to recognize that putting investments into declining neighborhoods often is a really smart thing to do. We can create opportunities in those neighborhoods. Why are we not, in this neighborhood that's generating all this wealth, why are we not fixing the streets? Why are we not maintaining the sidewalks? Why are we not going out there, watching where people struggle and making incremental investments to make their lives better? That is a real strategy for people who need affordable housing. The other part of this that I think is really important is to understand how the incremental development pattern works. Today we tend to build things and think that it will be in a finished condition when it's done, and then we'll put it under glass and it will always be that way. And so what we wind up with is pods of single socioeconomic. This is our single family homes in the $300,000 range. This is our single family homes in the $250,000 range. These are our duplexes. These are our apartments, and they're all different. And so, we need more affordable housing, so let's zone more of this pod and build more of these apartments. And that's not how successful cities work. The way successful cities work is to always be no neighborhoods under glass. They're all growing slowly and incrementally over time. So you have a single family home. The next increment of growth is not stasis, it is a carriage apartment or an accessory apartment or conversion to a duplex. You have a duplex, the next thing is to join with the home next to you and create some row houses. There's a continuum here that you're always in. When I showed you that little pop-up shops going to, the same thing happens in residential neighborhoods that are successful and vibrant and growing. And what happens when you grow incrementally over time is that because it's the small increment, you're making space for everybody. A lot of times cities, when they talk about infill, when they talk about downtown residential development, they're talking about 4 to 6 story condo units that are priced at bizarre, we look at them in our market and we say, oh my gosh, that's bizarre, the amount that they're asking for that. That's not the next increment. Jimmy's Pizza is the first increment. Jimmy's Pizza with a residence above is the second increment. If we do that for the next decade, we will have lots of affordable housing, lots of places for people, and tons of opportunity for people to start businesses that can grow and become more and more successful. So the increment of growth is how we include everybody.
Chuck, thank you very much
Thank you.
for your time. Thank you, everybody, for coming to Downtown Day. Please join us at Brick and Barley for the social. There's food, and we hope to see you there. Thank you.